Hello, you are listening to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we celebrate films we think deserve a little bit more love. Whether they're underrated, underseen, or sometimes even both, we're going to tackle them one film at a time. I'm the host, Josh Hallam. It's me again on my own this week. I'm tackling another listener's suggestion. Before I get stuck into it, if you could head on over to wherever you're listening to this on and give us a 5-star rating and review if the option's there for you, it would be massively, massively appreciated. It helps other people find us. And spreads the word, and it'll only take you a second. So if you could do that, if you could head on over and do that, that would be brilliant. But thank you very much for listening. Anyway, it's another listener suggestion, as I said. So we're going to be talking about Mona Lisa's Smile this week from 2003. So spoiler warnings if you've not seen it. This one was suggested by Al, who got in touch over on Twitter. If you haven't seen it, it's set in the 50s. It stars Julia Roberts as Catherine, an art history professor with progressive views who finds herself working at Wellesley College in America, which is a leading all-girls school presented in the film being a key word. We'll come back to that, as quite conservative. She then finds herself at odds with the powers that be as she encourages her students to look beyond their supposedly quote-unquote traditional destiny as housewives, and we get a glimpse into each of the students' lives, really. It's got a lot of really bright young cast in this. You've got Kirsten Dunst, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Julia Stiles is in this. There's a really, really great cast. So yeah, you get a little look into all their lives and their challenges, including Catherine, again, who's Julia Roberts' character as well. As I say, Al got in touch to suggest this one, and here's what he had to say. He said, it's definitely not rated. Its Rotten Tomatoes score is really low. I don't remember how it was regarded when it came out, but I assume not amazingly. Here's why I think it's good. Julia Roberts' performance is excellent. One scene I think is especially well acted is when she meets her class for the first time, and it slowly dawns on her that they know everything already. She controls her facial expressions really nicely, as it's quite a subtle emotion she's going for. It's not a disaster that they know everything, but in some ways it's pleasantly refreshing that female students are so knowledgeable, but they are undermining her. And the kind of knowledge they have is a bit too raw for her, so she needs to convey to us that she's a bit dismayed, but trying to keep her cool in front of her new class, and she handles it really well. In short, throughout the film, she does a good job of not overacting, as ultimately this isn't a very melodramatic film. I'd agree there, Al. Obviously, the cast is great. Julia Stiles, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Kirsten Dunst are all on good form. I especially like Kirsten Dunst and the arc of her character. It would have been very easy to make Betty simply punished for her meanness and brought down a peg or two. The scene where she's screaming at another character for being a slut, but the other characters don't argue back as they immediately see that her anger comes from her own insecurity, is an interesting choice. It's simple, pleasing, and heartwarming that Betty ends up being the one who misses Catherine the most. Not the most shocking decision of all time, I concede, but it's not a shocking quote-unquote film. But it is a better choice than Betty simply being in some way shamed for her arrogance. I like the fact that every character has a little story of their own. Possibly this is taking a little bit far, as I'm not totally sure that we need Catherine to have two love interests. Possibly Bill or Paul is too many. I'd agree with you there, Al, as well. Maybe the point is that we see Catherine indulging in multiple partners outside of wedlock and not feeling ashamed of herself, which is perhaps a little anachronistic. I think we also see Catherine wearing trousers at one point, which is not totally unheard of at the time, but certainly unusual. Just to remind you, it's set in the 50s. I might say that once or twice the film imposes modern values on history, but then it's not necessarily perfect. Just better than some of the reviews would suggest. I also want to specifically shout out the scene where Catherine tries to get her conservative housemate Nancy to go out for the night. But Nancy refuses because it's getting late and the TV programmes are on. This is a beautifully heartbreaking scene that plays out in miniature the trope of life passing you by without realising that life is in fact passing you by. Finally, I quite like the ending. A more obvious ending would have had Catherine winning all of her battles, convincing the school that times are changing, that a slightly rogue teacher is a good thing to have if they can inspire the students. But of course, it's the 50s, and that would be very Hollywood to go down a sadder route. So they go down a sadder route, which also makes sense because, of course, the patriarchy remains strong for many decades to come, and so it would be a bit of a whitewash to make a film about sexism that ends with it being defeated in the 50s. So thankfully, they avoid the Green Book route and of, and after that, there was no more prejudice in America ever. So, as I said again, not necessarily Citizen Kane, but I think very enjoyable and deserves to get a bit more respect. Lovely little dig at Green Book there, Al, as well, which is a film that I actually do quite like, although I appreciate some of its flaws. So, going in then to this one, I'd heard of this, but I'd never seen it before. So, just to remind you, the structure will start with the positives, what I liked about it, and then we'll move on to the negatives, and then we'll circle back to that critical reception and that box office, and we'll have a little look. Is it underrated? Is it underseen? Or is it both? But Al seems to be saying there he thinks it's underrated. Going into the likes then, I thought this was pretty good. I had a pretty good time with this. I thought there was plenty to like. I thought thematically it was really, really strong, and I wonder if that's been missed at the time, which I'll come back to. I thought it was an interesting look into a specific historical window you don't normally see. I've touched on this before, but I'm a big fan of, historical pieces of work covering historical periods quite specifically, because it shines a light on issues in a broader sense whilst telling you something about perhaps a little bit of history that you didn't know. Obviously, this is fictional, but it's set in the real world. It's set at the real college. So I liked the idea of the exploration of women's issues at the time. So things like marriage lessons, how to sit, how to act. There's a whole scene where two characters get really, really excited over having, I think it's a washer or a dryer or both. It almost acts as a piece of work that's almost like a little time capsule for exploring women's issues of the day. Around the specifics that I didn't know about. It's 70 years ago. It's not something I know that much about, and I think it's really important that you shine a light on this idea of imposing a tradition and the patriarchy that Isles touched on, which is still, let's be honest, still very much an issue today. But it's better, it's better than it was, or some perhaps would say it isn't, but I would say it is. So, exploring these issues, how to act, how to be, then also exploring things like sexuality, having a seat at the table to discuss it, but not actually being able to do anything about it. Then it brings in the duality of what they're facing. These are young women who, in a way, they seem to be brainwashed. They want to get married because that's what they've been taught to do at the behest of their future and their own wants and needs. But then the other side of it being they want to succeed in a career. They don't believe they can have both. Some of them who you think have been pushed into just wanting that traditional life, the marriage, the kids, actually turns out that they do want that and they're not that bothered about the career. And it's an interesting exploration in expectations of women of the time and things like that, whilst also offsetting that against some of the older, as it were, older. We're talking about college age girls here, but Julia Roberts' character, it makes a point of saying she's 30. She has friends in it or colleagues who are much older than her, exploring the issues they're facing. A character in it is gay and has to hide that, things like that, exploring those issues at the time. I thought it was really, really interesting. I thought ultimately it made a good point around kind of high society, as it were, conservatism in the period, in that it's stifling and choking of independent thought, and how you challenge that. What's right, what's wrong. It's interesting. I thought it was really, really interesting. I thought it was all brought to life with really good production design, great use of, lighting and things like that, uplifting, warm music, great costumes, great sets. Again, it's got that thing, and we shouldn't have to say it, but I'm saying it anyway. It feels like it was made in a real place, not on a green screen blob, as might happen now. As Al touched on, really, really great cast. It's, should go unsaid, but I'm going to say it. It's a primarily female cast, which I think is really, really important. Julie Roberts is great in this. I think she gives a really human performance. She does a whole monologue about advertising, which I found really, really powerful, and the roles we're born to fill and challenging that. I thought it was really good. As Al touched on, Kirsten Dunst is really good in it. She has quite a complex story, sort of a study in being the product of your environment, which I really, really enjoyed. Maggie Gyllenhaal's great as the kind of more rebellious but troubled one. Really great chemistry between the young girls as well. You believe they're classmates, you believe they're friends, you believe they fall out and make up again and things like that. So loads and loads to like in there. In terms of the dislikes, I'm going to split it into two things. Number one, my own dislikes, and number two, I've done a little bit of read around the criticism of it about why it didn't do so well, and then we'll come to the score. So in terms of my own dislikes, there isn't much really. I do agree with Al and I made this note before I read his message, which is there's probably one or two too many character stories. They're trying to fit too much into what is a relatively short run time. And I think by dialing it down, it's interesting because on one hand, you want to explore the issues, and perhaps what it feels like is if this was made now, it might be a TV show. Where you got to explore those issues over a 6, 8, 10, 12-hour series, whereas this is a whatever it is, 2-hour film. So it does feel a little bit overstuffed in terms of character development, and what that then does is detract a little bit from Julia Roberts' character. So she's almost plopped into this world as a disruptor with a bit of a hint about her as a character, and I wanted that more for her character than that. I wanted for it more to be almost a symbolic disruptor. I wanted to see, why is this woman so different for the time? Because she does really, really push the envelope. The other things, so there are two big criticisms I've seen of this online and reading around and things like that. One is that it's there's some historical inaccuracies, and two is that it's derivative of Dead Poets Society. Now, I picked up on the Dead Poets Society thing. I did make that note. It is derivative of Dead Poets Society. I can't really defend that in terms of it does follow that structure. It is the same thing. Stuffy conservative school, disruptor comes in. It is almost like they went, what if Dead Poet Society, but instead of young boys, it's young girls. All I would say is that's not to detract from the issues it's exploring, because those are still important and I still enjoyed the executed. But the comparison is there, clear as day. You can see it. If you know anything about how the Hollywood system, is made, you can see it. Someone writing it on a whiteboard. What if Dead Poet Society but women? So that's a shame. The other criticism is around some historical inaccuracies, mainly about a criticism of that school at the time wasn't that conservative. It wasn't as it is made out to be. I think they've really distanced themselves from it. Now, I don't know that, so I'm not going to go into that. What I would say is, doesn't need to be set in a real school. There's no reason it needs to be set in a real school. They could have just made it a fake school. The issues are very much valid. The fact that it's set in a real school has probably drawn some attention to it that it really didn't need. And I think, I think that's a shame, really. But for all accounts, the school wasn't as it's portrayed in the film. Critical reception then. So just to remind you, I think I'll pick this because I think it's underrated, but we'll look at both. In terms of the structure, we always look at the IMDb, then we go into the Rotten Tomatoes audience and critics, then we average them out. So at the time of recording, over an IMDb, it gets 6.6 out of 10. Over in Rotten Tomatoes, the audience give it 60%, so I'd be probably in about that ballpark of the IMDb and the Rotten Tomatoes audience. But the critics give it 33%, which I think is harsh. If you average that out, it's 53%, so 5 out of 10 if you like. I think that's harsh for me. I think that's underrated. I think there's plenty to like here. I wonder if that Dead Poet Society and the fact that it came out within whatever it would be 10 years after it is probably doing it a disservice. I think watching it now, there's some really important exploration of issues in there, and I think it's a shame that this has been lost. Box office wise, it did okay. Did 141.5 million worldwide. Obviously got a really lot of attention at the time. Julia Roberts, a lot of press at the time about how much she was paid for the film, because I think it was the most a female lead had ever been paid for film, $25 million. Overall, I'd say it's underrated. In particular, that critics score, I think that's harsh. I do wonder, and I hate to say it, if there's some underlying sexism in there. And I think it's underseen. It did well at the time, but I don't think many people are coming back to this. I will summarise with this. I've said this before and I will say it again, and no doubt I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. This is the sort of film that is for people who don't really go to the cinema. That's important, but not only that, it was cinema that appears to be cinema for everyone, but it's directed at women. That's important. Not everything has to be crashy, smashy, superheroes, action films, whatever. These types of films exploring issues with a female-driven, cast and things like that are important. And if people don't go and see them, then they won't get made. So I think it's important to note that. It's underrated. It's underseen. That's it. A little bit of a longer one there, because mainly because Al wrote quite a big message, which I really appreciated, but I did have to read it. And I really wanted to get that message across there, because I think this is well worth your time. It's worth a look. I think this falls into it would be TV if it was made now. But anyway, we'll be back next week with another episode. All that remains to be said is, in the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, if you'd like to suggest a film, it's filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on all the social medias. If you search for Just Films and That, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, we're always putting stuff out there. Give us a follow. Everything you need is in the link tree in the show notes. We're on Letterboxd as well. Give us a follow on there. Everything you need, as I say, is in the show notes. Click the link tree. That'll take you wherever you want to go. Follow us, engage with us, message us, suggest a film. Thank you so much for listening. We really, really appreciate it. We'll see you next week. It's goodbye from me. Cheerio.